and after we will have time for questions. So welcome to everybody, and I will try briefly to talk to you about the Pirro Nord Site and its implication within the first European toppling. So the Pirro Nord Site, just 1 second to see my very nice first slide. Okay. The Pirro Nord Site, it's among the sites that attest the first arrival of human in Europe. Of course, we all know that we have evidences older than the European one in Manisi, and geographically Georgia, of course, it's Europe, and we have older evidences in Asia. But I'm sure that Francois and Marie and all the San-Giovanni Research Group will talk about it. So when we want to investigate the first purpling in Europe, we are facing to a quite difficult situation, because between 1.5 and 1 million years ago, we have very few sites, especially if we compare this situation with more recent sites like the Acheulean one or like the Middle Paleolithic one, and we will not talk about the Upper Paleolithic one. So whatever we are considering about this span of time, we have to face with very mosaic data, because we have few general environmental data, even because the dating for this period have a high error, and it means that it's complicated to have very clear environmental data, and we have really a lack of information after between 1 million years ago and 600 kilo years ago. So finally, we are losing our time with this course. But as we have few things we have to do and to try to do with what we have, but remember that whatever I will say during my lesson, those data cannot be really used to build a model, even if we do it. So this is the situation by a general point of view. We know that in Africa, the first evidences of lithic production are dated to 3.3 million years ago. And of course, at that time, there were no Homo. So the technological history of lithic production starts before the Homo arrival. We know that very soon, around 1.8, 1.7, we have occupation of North Africa. Like very soon, we have occupation of Southeast Asia. And concerning Europe, our most known data are the ones coming from the site of Manisi in Georgia, that is dated around 1.8 million years ago. Concerning the site that is excavated by University of Ferrara, that we will talk about today, we have just a biochronological dating. So we will discuss this aspect after. Talking about out of Africa, just a small thing is that we have not to think about men that are taking their clothes, taking their wallets and go out of Africa. Of course, we are talking about something like a dispersal, but for this period, it's quite complicated to really define which are the time of this dispersal. I mean, how long does it take to reach Pirro Nord, for example, from East Africa? By a general point of view, as we have said before, the site attesting the European occupation between around 1.6 or 1.5 and 1 million years ago, they are very few, and the most important one are listed in that map. We will also see that from this side, sometimes we have very small assemblages, and so it's not so easy to really define if within both sides there are real similarity in technical behavior. Julie will talk to you about humans, but just to remember a little bit what we are talking about, we know that in this period of time, we have no clear and definable Homo fossils. The most important fossils attesting the first European poplin, if we forget, of course, the Homogeologicus in Manisi, it's the mandible coming from Cima del Elefante in Spain. And you will have the courses from URV in the following days, so we will not spend our time there. And we have also one teeth coming from the Gaudis Baza Basin, but all those specimens, as they are not complete, but very better than nothing like it's in Pirro Nord, they have just a gender attribution, so they are Homo SP. And by the side, paradoxically, we can say so much about the first species that arrived in Europe, but we can say something about the technological behavior. So, of course, the first question that we have to ask to ourselves is this out of Africa, this movement, it's influenced by what? There are several theories about that. Of course, someone is saying that demographical increasing can be the engine for such a dispersal, but it's very complicated to define how many they were. Recent studies, for example, about the Neanderthal population told us that they are very few in relation to what we can imagine. And for this period, we really cannot define how many they were. Of course, climatic condition can influence a movement of population, and generally it's complicated to define a specific climate for a so long period. Valeroy and colleagues say us that during early Pleistocene we have a warmer than the present climate cycle. And at that time, the obliquity was the orbital parameter influencing the cyclicity of the changes. So just to understand, now we will talk about span of time of 500,000 years, between 1 million more or less and 1.5 millions. And so according to this environmental reconstruction, we can assume that generally the East Africa is the best passage. Of course, when we try to make a whole discussion about the spread out of Africa, we can imagine that Homo was following climatic condition also. So they was trying to go where the climatic condition were similar to the ones they was used to. And this can be one of the reasons why the first European poplin is not going in the northern latitude. And we will see that just after we assist to the occupation of, for example, UK and northern latitude. And by a general point of view, the paleoenvironmental reconstruction of the different sites we have are giving different data, but all of them are quite related to the presence of water. We was talking about how many they were, and there are such studies that try to make a simulation about how many peoples were living during lower and Paleolithic. And for this period, the studies are very few, but Malinsky, Buller, and Hovers have tried to define the population composition between the lower and middle Paleolithic transition. And basically, these studies assumes that groups were made in between 20 and 17 individuals, and this kind of observation has been done in function of technological homogeneity. But of course, we know that lithic technology represents only a small part of a huger technological expression but this is the technological part that is conserved in the archaeological records. It means that this kind of data is not definitely or completely feasible. By a general point of view, several authors have observed a significant increase in population during Middle Paleolithic, and can be also, of course, the explanation of why during Middle Paleolithic we have an increasing of sites. So other authors are considering that any kind of simulation concerning population dimension during the lower Paleolithic can be viable. So, for example, in 2017, Vasnen said that population size is not the crucial determinant of cultural complexities. So he was stressed that finally we cannot define the number of people living together according to the technology. And so we cannot define the homogeneity of a population according to the ethics. And after this introduction, we will come to the site of Pirro Nord, which, as you know, it's a site excavated since more or less 15 years, I think, from the University of Ferrara. A lot of students of our master has excavated in Pirro Nord during those 15 years. And of course, this summer, the students will be welcome to excavate in Pirro Nord. As you can see in the map, this is Italy, and Pirro Nord is located in the Puglia region, here in the south of Italy. It's a quite strange site because it's a fissure inside an active limestone quarry. It means that whatever we found in Pirro Nord is not in primary position. If it was a site of Middle Paleolithic, nobody had excavated it, and for so long time. But of course, as we are dealing with a period with very few sites, we have to think that it's in any case interesting to continue the excavation. Here in the photo, you can see by the upper an aerial photo of a Pirro Nord quarry that is including all this area. The extractive basin of Apricena is very known all around the world. For example, the airport of Tokyo is made with limestone coming from this quarry. And Pirro Nord is just on one of the final part of this huge quarry here. And you can see here that it's not far today from the sea. By a general point of view, the Pirro Nord quarry, that it's dell'Erba quarry today, it's composed by limestone, that is also called Pietra di Apricena, and inside this limestone we have polygenic karst fissure that were firstly filled during final Miocene and Pleistocene, so around 75 million years ago. And inside those fissures, we can find one fauna that it's called Microtia fauna, but it's endemic. At that time, the Gargano promontory was an island. So in that time, the kind of fauna developed there, it was made by, like we will see, for surely for the Southeast Asia situation. But in this time, so we have giantism and nanism insular. So here you can see, for example, the Microtia magna, that it's a huge mouse living there, and another extinct, of course, animal, but it's the Oplitomeryx that is characterized by free horn. And some of these fissure dating to final Miocene and Pleistocene were after made empty and refilled again during Villafranchian. And of course, our researches are concentrated on both Villafranchian infilling. As you can see, we have a lot of fissure. Very few of them are filled by Villafranchian sediments, and only one of them has an association between lithic industry and fauna remain, and this is the Pirro Nord fissure. Here you can see the limestone. This is Pirro Nord, and this is what we call Cappellaccio, but it's a Pleistocenic calcarenite. Okay, as we told you I told you before, Pirro Nord it's only a fissure, so like a dolina, and the material fall down the fissure. Inside it, we can find lithic remains, faunas, and those faunas remains are partially coming from the human activity as attested by the cut marks, and partially coming by normal accumulation of the bones. It's quite impossible to define a stratigraphy within the sediments because everything is very chaotic, and the reconstruction that we have made after years and years of study is that the first phase of the filling of the fissure was composed by the falling of bleak blocks. Our main activity during the excavation is to show power in taking out big, very big blocks. And inside this block, after the sediments, the lithics and the bones arrive, and most part of the sediments are argille, are clay or sands. So here on the left, you can see resume the free phase of the site formation. So we have a first phase with a prehistorical settlement that, according to the taphonomical analysis, were not so far from the Pirro Nord actual position. So Homo was living upstairs, and they were producing lithic industry. They were exploiting animal carcasses. After, we have several phases where those material exposed on the top of a fissure somewhere were altered by mechanical alteration and by physical alteration after, and chemical, sorry. And all this material has been brought inside the Pirro Nord fissure basically by the water. And inside Pirro Nord, that we consider as a more or less instantaneous accumulation, of course at the geological scale of time, it has closed inside all the remains, and both has been discovered during the quarry extraction, because before here was the level of the land, and now we have more or less 70 meters of excavation inside the limestone, and Pirro Nord were exposed during those work of excavation. By the paleontological point of view, before it became new for the human presence, Pirro Nord was already very well known for the Paleontological Association, and we have a faunal unit attributed to the final Villafranchian that is called Pirro Nord. This Pirro Nord faunal unit is the last Villafranchian faunal unit, and it's composed by more than 20 species of amphibian and reptiles, 47 species of bird, and more than 40 species of mammals. Of course, Among those mammals, we include Homo, even if we never found the human remains. But as we have found its activity, of course, Homo was present. Among the mammals, we have a lot of differentiation with carnivores and herbivores. And for example, we have two kind of subversive tigers. And we can see on the bones the activities of those carnivores. And one interesting thing is that probably we saw a secondary access to the carcasses by Homo, but we will see it together. As I introduced you before, to give a date to Pirro Nord is not so easy. We have tried everything. We even go to the Santuario of Padre Pio to ask for a date, but nothing happened. And so the only way to have a date is according to biochronology. The Pirro Nord faunal unit, before the founding of lithic industry, was already attributed to a span of date between 1.6 and 1.3, more or less, millions years ago. Both accord to the large mammals, but specifically to the small mammal. A new study of small mammal has been made by Juanma Lopez Garcia and colleagues, between them Claudio Berto, of course. And this study confirmed that finally the Lophariomis rufoi, that was the micro mammal, used more to define a chronological attribution of Pirro Nord, confirmed that the date of Pirro Nord is about 1.5 million years ago. So we cannot say which is really the first European site, because all sites has different kind of datation, a very huge fork of chronology, but we have a clear picture that something happened about 1.5 million years ago in Europe. Concerning the paleoenvironmental reconstruction, the study of large mammal and micro mammal and of birds allow to say that during the occupation, we are assisting to a forest reduction and expansion of open areas. So between 1.6 and 1.3 million years ago, the southern part of Italian peninsula is facing to an inaridification of the climate. And in Pirro Nord, we know that there were several water, but with temporary persistence. And this is mainly defined on the base of birds, aquatic birds. Concerning the lithic production in Pirro Nord, now after a lot of years of excavation, we are facing with a quite important lithic assemblage, that it's always made on local raw material. And this is typical of this period. Generally, Homo in this period were collecting and using local raw material. It means that they were going to live already in places that allow them to have food, something to nap, and water. After, when we go up in prehistory, we will see that this kind of behavior is changing. And another problematic is related to the fact that all those raw material, in most part of the oldest one in Europe, are collected in a secondary position. It means that they were not going in the principal outcrop to collect raw material, but they were collecting pebble inside the river or in the Tritic formation. It means that it's more complicated to really define the clear provenance of raw material, because if they were collecting in a river, for example, 1.5 million years ago, how we will know where this kind of pebble was available in the river at that time, as we can only see where they are today. By a general point of view, in Pirro Nord, they were collecting two kinds of raw material, big pebble or medium pebble and small pebble. And the reduction sequences are different, not according to the kind of raw material, but according to the dimension of the initial pebble. So the small pebble were exploited by a centripetal method. And by those kind of exploitation, we are obtaining some blanks that can be considered in some kind very recurrent, and you can see there. The centripetal exploitation of small pebble allow to produce this kind of point that are déjetés, so the point is not in axis with the technological axis of the flake, and this point, it's always opposed to a back. So it can be considered as something like a real technological choice. By the other side, we know also that to exploit a small pebble, we have not 1 million of possibilities. And you can see both morphology here and here, for example. The big pebble, like this one, is characterized by the utilization of several striking platforms and following several debitage surface, finalized to obtain a flake of middle dimension that can be used for the cutting-edge. I want to stress that the study of taphonomy and also the composition of phyletic assemblage allow us to hypothesize that all the material from, more or less, all the material from the mine side is now in the fissure of Pirro Nord, because we have all sides. So the reduction sequences are quite complete in terms of representative of all the phases of reduction. We have very few cases of retouched pieces, so where the cutting edge has been intentionally modified in order or to reactivate the cutting edge or to change the function of the flake. The archaeological study has been made by Razika Kelly during her Erasmus Mundus PhD, and so she tried to define which were the approach of Homo to the animal carcasses and to define the presence of cut marks, because before any cut marks were underlined in Pirro Nord, and this was given a little bit of problem in defining the correlation between the lithic industry and the faunal assemblage. So basically here on the left, you can see the high number of individuals found in the Pirro Nord site, and you can see that we have, as we have said before, carnivores and herbivores. Concerning the age of those animals is not clear for the moment. It's not possible for the moment to underline a clear pattern. And together with the archaeological study, a use-word analysis was performed by Gabriele Berruti with two aims. The first one was to compare the taphonomical history of bones and of lithics in order to say if lithics and bones have the same history. And so they are coming all together inside the fissure. And of course, it's quite hard to find use-word for this kind of material, but on 5 flakes, among the 100 of flakes we have found, it was possible to underline the presence of use-word, and those use-word attest a high angle of work, the presence of cutting action, and consequently, they related to butchering activities, as of course we was thinking. And by the way, cut marks can be found mainly on herbivores and in indeterminate bones. And probably we have example also of secondary access to prey, because we have a superposition of carnival activities and after human activities. As we know, at that period, it's very complicated to really define what it was an active hunting, what it was charognage. And basically, we all know that probably at that time, the charognage, the scavenging, was most important than the active hunting. So if we want to make general consumption about what Pirro Nord can tell us, because we have seen that it's a secondary position site with more or less well dated, but it's in between one of the sites with more lithic industry at that time. So we can even have some idea about the behavior. So we have seen that the site probably has been shown according to the environment, because we have flint available in the surrounding of the site. And I forgot to tell you that the only raw material used was flint, of course. We are in an open area environment, so where I can have access to different animals with temporary bodies of water. We probably have defined a secondary access to prey and a species differentiation in what concern the animal exploitation. And we have seen also that the knapping methods are completely adapt to the raw material morphology, so to the dimension of the raw material. By a general point of view, we can see several kind of choices made by the prehistorical man, attesting that at the moment of the out of Africa, of course, the Homo was in possession of a very good technology. Because the problem is sometimes we have tendency to see the high and the huge differentiation attested during the final phase of lower Paleolithic, for example, during Acheulean and during middle Paleolithic. We even don't mention the upper Paleolithic, but this time we can also see a very good specialization. The problem, it's mostly related to the lack of data, but as in the last 10 years, a lot of very old sites have been, new old sites have been discovered. I'm sure that with the continuation of research, we will have more information about that. Okay, so if we want to try to make, to found convergences, divergences between the oldest European site, we can try to take into consideration different parameters, but of course, they are the parameters that we are considering important, and we are not sure that they really are important. So we can see that in this span of time, we have open area occupation and cave occupation. Of course, the same population can live sometimes in a cave, sometimes in open area. So this is for sure not a discriminant. If we are considering the raw material, most part of the sites are using only one raw material. Even in the surrounding, there are different kind of raw material. For example, in Pirro Nord, we also have limestone, but it seems that they don't use it. And those raw material are differentiated because, for example, in Pont de Lavaux, we have vein quartz and Filonian quartz, and they exploit only that one. In Pirro Nord, they exploit only flint, so it's quite complicated to really find a trend. And by the point of view of environment in the different sites, several kind of specific local environment has been underlined. So if you want to find something that is really common to all those sites, it's quite complicated. For sure, we can say that the raw material is local and that the main time of the lithic production were the flake. So basically, all the technological production is mostly related to animal carcass treatment. And we can consider that is a very good activity. But by the other side, we know that it's very hard to perform use wear on this kind of material. And so the indirect attestation of wood utilization is not so defined. But the fact that we cannot see it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And so, of course, when we are talking about technology, we are taking into consideration also lithic because they are conserving, but we are missing a lot of information about the possible utilization of wood. So if we want to trace a general picture, for sure, we know that the first evidence of Euro occupation are dating back to at least 1.5 million years ago. It means that the spread out of Africa, it's made very early. I mean, 40 years ago, everybody was convinced that it was impossible for Homo to attend Europe before 400,000 years ago. When Isernia has been discovered first, and the first date that we get of Isernia, it was 750,000 years ago. And at that time, it was considered like a shock, impossible. And a lot of authors has critical Isernia, saying that it was impossible to have Homo 700,000 years ago in Italy. And now today we know that, of course, we have Homo almost all around Europe 1.5 million years ago. By the point of view of environment, as I told you before, it's impossible to really define a specific environment, and we can just say that most part of site are in open area and dry condition. And by the point of view of the behavior, you can say that there is the exploitation of local raw material. But when we are talking about local, concerning living and fauna, of course, we cannot have information about the mobility of this population because maybe they was passing one part of their life in one place, the other in another. And so basically, okay, it's local raw material, but it can be very differentiated if the same population is changing a lot their place to stay. And concerning Homo, of course, we hope that Pirro Nord will answer to that question, but it's not so easy because for this moment, the oldest human remains are not allowing us to really define a species. But I'm sure that it will be defined very soon because 10 years ago, it was also hard to say that we have found Homo. So I think this kind of research are in continuous evolution, like everything is for prehistory, and will allow us to have a better idea probably very soon. And I thank you for your attention. And of course, we open the floor to your question, curiosity, and whatever you want.